This is Talkin Jazz, presented by R.C. Willey and powered by Strong Auto Group.
All right, everybody, good evening. Welcome into another edition of Talkin Jazz. We just keep rolling along, and I have with me the radio voice of the Utah Jazz, David Locke. How's it going, David? Here we are again. Zoom is
good. We're getting closer to actually having basketball, which is nice. Well, I got to remember a lot of things. I'm suddenly remembering how much I don't know about where the season was and what was taking place. All of those things, I'm getting a little anxious.
And you're going to be all alone broadcasting on the radio. Is that how that's?
Well, I still plan to have Ron with me unless you know something I don't know.
No. I meant you won't be at the site, which will be weird, and no fans. So, hey, I told you before, just pipe in the fans. Get your own, laugh track kind of thing.
They've talked about using EA Sports games, and it was interesting. I read an article with one of the creators of EA Sports who talked about how vital and important they think that is to their games and how much they've really focused on that to be able to make their games lifelike. So that might be the perfect scenarios to try to figure out what they've done and how they have kind of emulated crowd noise. I've never thought about it while playing video games, but you're certainly right that the video game noise makes the game a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. And the noise in the arena, we've had a couple of baseball players that have played overseas, have they reopened the Korean League and that, and they said it's the pitcher can literally talk to the dugout. At this level, right? And it's just so weird. So I'd run it into the arena, but I don't know that they'll do that. So
I think one of the other ones that was interesting is there was Taiwanese basketball went on for a while, and one of the players told a story about dunking and giving out the primal scream.
Oh yeah,
and everyone looking at him like, "What's wrong with you? What are you doing?"
Right. It's going to be interesting. There's no doubt about that. But let me ask you this. First of all, there's starting to be issues pop up. Obviously, Florida, by the way, is getting coronavirus spikes like crazy. The NBA hasn't said anything about that changing their plans. A couple of players, Jokic tested positive, a couple of Suns players. But, David, don't you think that the league probably anticipated this sort of thing and that it is going to happen?
I think so. When we look at the number of positives on some of these college football teams that are coming in for voluntary workouts, I think you have to anticipate, particularly with the lack of social distancing that's going on in ages 30 and below right now across our country, and some, just kind of disregard for what the CDC and the epidemiologists are telling us we're supposed to do, that you're having this. Serbia is supposedly like the European version of Florida right now from everything I've read. And you have, Jokic has his case, and the tennis player had his tournament with 3 players testing positive. So I think that you're seeing, behavior characteristics leading to more positive tests. And so it's not that big a surprise. The NBA has structured this in a manner that I think is done very well. If you think about wave 1 is right now, that players come back to facilities, they get tested now. They're not leaving the facilities now and to go to Orlando for about 14 days. The 7th, 8th, and 9th, I believe, are the departure dates. You arrive the 7th, 8th, or 9th. If you were test positive when you enter into the bubble in Orlando, then all of a sudden we don't play till the 31st. So that's 19, 20, 21 days until. So I think they've built a few of these little levels here and that the concept really is that by, I don't have a date, but let's just take the opening game, January 30th, that you have everyone's been tested and everyone tests negative, and then you move forward. And then your only threat is the outside workers that are coming in. Obviously, Orlando being a hotbed right now doesn't help. But if you read the CDC stuff, they talk about being within 6 feet for 10 minutes. I don't think there'll be a lot of hotel workers that are within 6 feet for 10 minutes of many of the players if this is structured the way I've read it to be.
Well, there's no question, and I agree with everything you're saying, that the NBA, all leagues, have thought this through. Look at golf. They had a player test positive last week. He withdrew for the tournament, and that's that. They will move forward. It's
and that one, and Dave, sorry to interrupt you, but that one's going to be interesting. So they'll test again this week. How many of those same players that were in contact with Nick Watney will test positive? That's going to be a really interesting data point for us to have this week.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. But again, I think everyone has these plans in place. You hope that you're right, that it doesn't spread to, a catastrophic level where suddenly you have to have, there are people who shared a jet with him. So, but they've been tested, no symptoms, things like that. But we'll see where that goes. The transaction window opened up today. It seems so weird. If this were a normal world, none of this would have happened. I think we'd be drafting this week. Do you anticipate?
I think today's the day we drafted Donovan.
I think you might be right. So, but that's not put off till the middle of October. But any thought at all that the Jazz would even need to do anything along those lines? We've heard a number of players have said they're not going to go, but very few of them have said that, and we haven't heard that at all out of any Jazz player.
I mean, the Jazz have a pretty big gap in the fact that Bojan Bogdanovic is out for the rest of the season, and they have to fill that. So if you could add some depth at that position and sign a free agent in that way, you might. But when you look at the available free agents, most of, DeMarcus Cousins is not really an option. Trey Burke doesn't fit that need. Jamal Crawford doesn't fit that need. We have Jordan Clarkson, who's just, like the new version of Jamal Crawford and way better than Jamal was at the end of his career. So if you could find someone to help with those Bogdanovic minutes or that role, that's the gap right now that the Jazz have. Now, Jarrell Brantley is, the two-way players are going to go to Orlando. So I don't know what the Jazz do, but maybe there's a way that you take 4 of those 8 games and you give Jarrell Brantley some time and get to see. The seeding is important in the sense of matchups, but it's no longer important in the sense of home court. So 4 or 5 doesn't matter. Frankly, I'm not totally sure that 6-3 matters. I'd like to avoid 7 because that's Clippers or Lakers in all likelihood in the first round. So if you can keep yourself out of the Clippers and Lakers first round matchup, then maybe you use some of those 8 games in the regular season to give somebody like Jarrell Brantley a run and see how he plays in those circumstances, almost the way you would a summer league, but a summer league against NBA players.
Interesting you'd point that out because there are going to be that group of teams that needs that 8 games, every single one of them. And then you're right. If the Jazz could fall into that where they could simply use it as exhibition, and you've talked about using it as time to get used to playing without Bojan. So, we'll see where that goes. Are you surprised at all, by the way, that there's just a few of them, the players have said, I'm not going to go?
So unless I've missed someone, and so I apologize. Trevor Ariza's circumstance seems unique with the visitation rights to his son. DeMarcus Cousins is a recovery. There's no, he doesn't need the money, and the injury risk seems like it'd be really high. Davis Bertans is maybe the most interesting. He's had 2 ACLs in his life. He's 8 games away from free agency. He's going to get his big payday, having a great season this year. He decides he's going to sit out. Washington seems to be more than willing to let him do it because I'm not convinced that Washington wants to be the 8th playoff team. I'm not sure from when Washington was in town in Salt Lake City before the season got put on hold, that they really were that interested in being the 8th playoff team from the conversations I had around them. They're waiting for John Wall to come back next year. This break's actually advantageous to them because they'll get an extra few months for John Wall to be at the peak of his game next year when he comes back. So I'm not sure that the Davis Bertans one wasn't as much just a mutual agreement between Washington and Davis Bertans. We'll re-sign you. We don't need you now. We don't need to make the playoffs. We're good.
Let's shift gears for just a minute here because I want to talk a little bit about what has been going on in the country in the aftermath of the George Floyd death. We saw the Floyd mural, very beautiful mural painted in Salt Lake that was horribly defaced, awful. Wish they could catch the people who did that. And Donovan Mitchell had put out a tweet. In fact, it said, "Can't even have a mural. It's sad, dog, real sad." I mean, it breaks your heart to see something like that. Hits home there. What is your reaction to that? And you wonder if it changes Mitchell's perspective of living in Utah.
Well, I think, my perspective is the sadness that you have as a member of our community that they feel that the mural of George Floyd gets defaced and that they feel that personally, and we all should feel it personally, but there's no question that Donovan felt that personally, and every Black member of our community had to see the black tar. I mean, it was really disgusting on that mural and feel pain. we all should feel that, frankly. So I haven't thought about it from a standpoint of, whether Donovan wants to, be in Utah or not. But I don't think there's a lot of residents that should want to be in Utah if that's what's going to happen to a George Floyd mural. I don't think it has anything to do with basketball. That's just a really disappointing moment in our community that a mural that represents Black Lives Matters gets defaced. That's a problem.
You're right. It breaks your heart to even see that kind of thing. What do you expect out of this team in Orlando, out of the Jazz? I mean, that's the tough part, especially with no Boyan.
I think the interesting one for Quinn is going to be, do we play the exact same style? Do we work on a different style? Do we try to play the game in some different fashion? I think coaching this 8-game stretch into the postseason is something that's obviously never been done before in the history of sport, frankly. And so do you just try to have a training camp? Do you change who you are? Our personnel is a little different. Mike Conley specifically is probably in a very different place as a player. It's been such a tumultuous season for him, having been in the same place for 13 years of his career, to then coming to Utah and trying to figure it out, and then struggling, and then having the injury, and now he's had a whole reset button. I think that we may see a very different Mike Conley and a much more free Mike Conley, and I think Quinn might free him up a little bit.
Yeah.
I think Quinn might play a different game than he's played before. I wouldn't be surprised if the mastermind has a different defense here or there, So I think there's a lot of things that he may be doing, and I don't know what we're going to look like as a team, but our strengths have changed a little bit, right? So
right.
Donovan, Mike, Jordan all can beat someone off the bounce. That's not usually a team we've had. Like, if you go back and think about the team we had with Ricky Rubio and Joe Ingles, and Donovan could beat someone off the bounce, and Derek Favors and Rudy Gobert, we only had one guy on the whole team that could beat you off the bounce. Well, now all of a sudden we're going to have a team that's got Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell and Jordan Clarkson. And while Joe's not, electrifying, he's actually a pretty darn good athlete in a lot of ways and can do things. So I think you might see this team play a very different style of basketball because the personnel is very different than it was.
And Joe will like you saying that he's actually a very athletic guy, smart man.
Well, I mean, the fact is he's 6'8". Like, he really is.
He is, yeah. David, it's always a pleasure. I like the Locked On sign. You've improved.
It's actually a local company made that for me. If I'm allowed to give them a shout out, it's Crown Ogden. Matt Lund made that for me, and so I'm very thankful.
There you go. David Locke, the radio voice of the Jazz, and hopefully everything will just keep moving along, and we'll be back to basketball soon. Thanks for joining me, David.
See you, buddy.
Back right after this.